Coming up, a conversation among industry and UN leaders on how collaborations and partnerships have become an essential paradigm in the humanitarian response during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So, hello, my name is Richelle Carey, and I am honored to moderate this upcoming discussion as we explore the response of public-private partnerships to this current global emergency we are all living through. I mean, the reason this is happening virtually is because we are all living with the challenges of COVID-19, one of the worst pandemics really in modern times. It is stretching all of us. It is challenging all of us as individuals, as companies, as NGOs, as governments, to respond in ways we probably haven't thought of before. On the business side, of course, there's Gaia, which is the Global Humanitarian Action Executive Alliance, which is funded by the state of Qatar. We appreciate that very much. A group of business leaders that are really trying to generate action and humanitarian assistance to achieve those all-important SDG 17, the Strategic Development Goals, and to keep doing that and moving towards that goal even as we are in the middle of this global pandemic. Private companies partnering with or helping in the humanitarian field is nothing new, but this deliberate partnerships, there's a lot of momentum behind this, and I think it's really being challenged in this global emergency. So we have a dynamic set of panelists to get to. Before I do that, I want to thank specifically the Deputy Secretary General for making this really important discussion happen. I think a lot of people are going to learn from. So the person I want to start with is a gentleman who has been on the forefront of exploring what it is that companies can and should be doing in the humanitarian space, particularly when it comes to partnering with bodies like the UN. Stanley Bergman, the chairman and CEO of Schein, the world's largest provider of healthcare products, and is a Fortune 500 company. Mr. Bergman, thank you so much for joining this panel. We appreciate it very much.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Richelle, for the introduction. Thank you, Richelle, for being with us today and moderating this panel. Looking very much forward to the panel. It is truly an honor to be here today with everyone and with fellow members of the Global Humanitarian Action Executive Alliance, better known as Gaia. Rob Aker from Salesforce, a software provider actually to our company. Rowan Douglas from Willis Towers, also a service provider to Schein. And my good friend and longtime partner of Schein's, Ed Martinez of the UPS Foundation, servicing millions of healthcare providers around the world. So pleased that Mariarosa Cutillo from UNFPA is with us today. And of course, perhaps most importantly, it is wonderful to be joined by UNICEF's youth advocate, Alliyah Logan, who represents the voice of the future. I would like to thank all the UN agencies who have been engaging with this alliance over the past 2 years for the opportunity to collaborate with you. And finally, would like to express my deep gratitude on behalf of all of us to Dr. Ahmed AlMaqki. So, Dr. AlMaqki, your exceptional leadership as a catalyst for Gaia has been terrific. So, as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and reflect on the General Assembly's theme of multilateralism, it is clear that the need for innovation and effective public-private partnerships is more critical today than ever before, especially in the context of pressing health, planetary, economic, and social political challenges facing the world. No time has it been more serious than at this time. We have come together today because we believe there is a vital opportunity to enhance collaboration between the private sector and the United Nations to foster a more effective humanitarian response. We cannot respond effectively in the midst of a crisis if we are only exchanging business cards on an ad hoc basis. If we work in our own silos, we miss the opportunity for exponential impact and synergies that come from collaboration amongst all of us. In this context, Gaia serves as an informal private sector advisory group to high-level United Nations officials, providing these officials with strategic advice and exploring areas of potential engagement by the UN with the private sector in coordinating emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. As the global healthcare supply company, Schein, we have pre-positioned critical healthcare products with our strategic NGO partners for many years to ensure that these strategic NGO partners are ready to respond immediately to natural disasters. And of course, have worked closely with UPS on this. Similarly, the Global Humanitarian Action Executive Alliance provides special opportunity to pre-position relationships between the private sector and UN agencies in advance of a crisis. By doing this, we work to facilitate deep understanding of the strengths, expertise, competencies of each of the actors, and first synergies for us to maximize the impact together. So working together, understanding the capabilities of each group and driving synergies. So I would like to share some details about one public-private partnership we've been deeply engaged with over the last 5 years as a case example of the power of these types of public-private partnerships. We are in a moment of history when the threat to human life, livelihood is unprecedented. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it is that viruses do not carry a passport and do not stop at borders. We have long known that to address complex risks like pandemics, we cannot be exchanging business cards in the midst of the crisis. Collaborative public-private partnerships are the only answer. So in 2015 in Davos, we laid the groundwork leading to the founding of the Pandemic Supply Chain Network, PSCN, together with the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the World Food Program, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UPS, BD, J&J, and more than 100 other manufacturers and different government agencies around the world. Pleased to be with Ed Martinez from UPS today, who has been a key partner in this effort all along. We spent 5 years in this effort together, developing tools to improve coordination with the goal of saving lives during crisis. As we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, the supply chain for personal protective equipment, PPE, basically gloves, masks, gowns, cleaning solutions, is fragile. These solutions, these products are needed to prevent a pandemic, prevent an epidemic. Yes, we need vaccines to vaccinate us before a pandemic, to prevent a pandemic. But if we don't have a vaccine, we need the PPE to ensure that there's infection control. These products are the first line of defense for healthcare professionals and for the public. From the outset of this crisis, we faced a perfect storm that put tremendous stress on the supply chain, which caused the shortage we are facing globally today, although it is somewhat relieved. Before the crisis, we experienced a worldwide shortage of gowns going into the crisis. In the first quarter of 2020, about 80% of the world's production of masks was coming from China, with a significant amount from Wuhan, where the coronavirus first started. Outbreaks struck right when China was closed for the Lunar New Year and factories didn't reopen. Consumers and companies around the world began buying massive quantities of PPE, and masks in particular, creating a worldwide shortage. And complicating the tight supply chain were many countries enforcing rapidly changing government restrictions on exports. At the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic supply chain, the Pandemic Supply Chain Network developed the list of critical items, disease commodity packages, as the World Health Organization calls them, to provide governments with guidance on the critical medical supplies and consumables needed for health professionals to effectively respond, as well as the appropriate technical specifications. The PSCN is also working closely with the UN Supply Chain Task Force, initiated by the World Health Organization and the UN Secretary General, to secure products for allocation to the most vulnerable countries by coordinating procurement and key products, to ensure and also ensuring allocation of these supplies based on country needs and support distribution through the World Food Program. In the face of the unprecedented challenges we face, the trust we have built among the partners to the pandemic supply chain network over the past 5 years has created enormous ability to share information. This trust would likely never would never have happened, and the information would never have been shared had we not had this public-private partnership. In the end, I believe that trust is the center of any impactful public-private partnership. There's a critical contribution for the private sector to make if given the opportunity to be a true partner. As I once said to Kofi Annan, call us and the private sector will come. International government organizations, governments in general, NGOs and civil society, all working together is critical. By realizing the full impact of this collaborative model means engaging the private sector beyond traditional charitable donations. We'll be there for the donations, but get us involved. The true power of collaboration comes when we enable each private and public sector partner to bring the individual strengths to the table and harness unique expertise and competencies that we each bring to the process. Doing this effectively requires carefully building trust with one another over time. One may ask why the private sector should devote so much time and resources to giving back to the communities in need around the world. Simply put, we have a moral obligation to act, and it is in our enlightened self-interest as business people to be involved. Global and local are more intertwined than ever, as this pandemic underscores so powerfully. Each sector of society must stand up and do our part, and we must do so in partnership with one another. So, thank you, Richelle, for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you all for participating in the panel. There is absolutely no question in my mind that had we not had a series of public-private partnerships globally, different countries, we would not be where we are. We'd be in even a worse position in fighting this virus. So thank you very much, everyone.
I think everyone understands now why we went to the dean first on this, and that's what I'm going to call you, Stanley Bergman. Thank you so much for all of your insight, the wealth of knowledge and experience that you have set the table with. We appreciate it. And also, congratulations on PSCN and all the wonderful, valuable things you have done. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm going to broaden this discussion out and bring in the other panelists that you have mentioned, many of whom you have relationships with. There's Rob Acker, who's the CEO of Salesforce.org. That is the dedicated social impact arm at Salesforce. He's had quite an impact as well, because Salesforce.org is one of the most innovative corporate philanthropies in the world. Eduardo, Ed Martinez, president of the UPS Foundation and chief diversity and inclusion officer, also a founding member of Gaia, and I will get to that in a moment. Rowan Douglas, head of the Climate and Resilience Hub at Willis Towers at Watson. He supports management and financing of risks like climate and other perils, including pandemics, and we will get to that as well. And Mariarosa, chief of the Strategic Partnerships branch of UNFPA. She has extensive experience in these initiatives with private-public partnerships. So, Rob, I'm going to get to you first. How do you get companies, and this is something Stanley said, that it's not just about exchanging business cards, right? How do you get companies to pivot from writing checks and giving away business cards and doing something more deliberate and intentional?
Well, I think there's a lot of silver lining that I've seen that's emerged from this crisis. And I think that prior to this crisis, I think that the big thing is that, number one, businesses need to realize and step up and realize that they have a bigger role to play. I would say, number two, they need to institute socially conscious models. And three, be open to breaking down the silos between the sectors. And from that, we can get incredible increased scale and an ability to drive greater outcomes and outputs. And I have seen, over the last few years, an acceleration in the efforts on the business community to do just that. But what is interesting about these times, it is rapidly accelerating. When we look at going beyond that check and shareholder and stakeholder value, I've seen just incredible partnerships emerge. As a matter of fact, one of the best examples I can think of is, it was mid-March. I think it was, I'm not going to get the dates right, but it was mid-March. And we get a call from Thrive Health in Canada, as well as a systems integrator in British Columbia. And as Stanley noted, there was a rush on the governmental side to figure out where all the PPEs were. Hospitals, they didn't know which hospitals to send them to, who had extra supply, who didn't have enough. In 1 week, they spun up an application built on our platform, and we worked together on this. And what they were able to do is give every hospital the ability to input the number of ventilators, beds, staff, PPEs that they had in British Columbia, and spun it up across 30 hospitals, made it a free and open source application. And now the government in British Columbia could actually see and get visibility in real time to insights into who had what supplies and what the supply chain fundamentally looked at. And we were talking real-time visibility. And I'm proud to say that was spun up in a week, and it was highly effective. And now one of the largest states in the United States is using it to track COVID testing kits. It's being used as far away as Nepal. It's a critical response management. What's really cool about it is not just the fact that it's COVID friendly, but this use case can proliferate across the entire emergency response management sector for everything from vaccine distribution to natural disasters. And it really opened up innovation, and it would have never happened had we done it on our own. We had to do it cross sector with a healthcare company, systems integrator, public sector, and we all worked together to kind of figure out what the requirements were and spin it up, because we were in an emergency and we didn't know what we were getting into collectively. And that would have never happened if each one of us tried to do it on our own.
So Ed, a similar question to you. Let me ask you, how do you think your involvement in Gaia and the fact that this type of involvement is something that UPS has taken very seriously, put you in a position to be able to deal with some of the challenges that are coming with this global emergency?
Well, thank you for the question, Richelle. And I do want to first say my thanks to Dr. Ahmed AlMaqki and, of course, the government of Qatar for sponsoring Gaia from the very beginning, and really thank all of my colleagues that who are constantly trying to really get to the equation of 1 + 1 = 3. But I do want to also underscore Mr. Stanley Bergman's leadership on this issue, on public-private partnership and on preparedness, because I can tell you that we have been under his leadership for over a decade on this issue, and we are all very thankful to him for his strong voice, which, as we know today, probably saved millions of lives because we were able to quickly activate because of these standby partnerships that we have. So thank you, Stanley, for your leadership, and which has brought us really here today. And we have seen that a lot of other coalitions through the World Economic Forum have sprung up as a result of the work from the PSCN that was started post-Ebola 5 years ago. But I will say that this has been changing well before COVID. If you go back to the change that the Business Roundtable did, this group, right, of over 200 global CEOs that changed the mission of businesses to be about more than just shareholders, right? They realized early or mid-late previous year that they changed their mission statement to be more about community, employees, customers, and shareholders. So I think the private sector CEOs have understood, as we've moved down this path, that yet besides the moral obligation, it's in, as Mr. Bergman said, in enlightened self-interest, right? Employees want to work for companies that are socially impacting their communities. And so for us, I mean, we consider ourselves as a doorstep company, and we have employees all over the world. And when something happens anywhere in their community, they want to help and they want to be a part of the solution. So we take not only a global view of our work, working with coalitions such as this, working with the United Nations systems, but we also have a strong grassroots impact in these communities. You know, one of the tactics that we use for COVID, because as we know, there's been a cascading effect of COVID. There's been impact on food security. education, healthcare, and financial stability. So our people around the world are engaging grassroots organizations, and they have essentially engaged in about 1,200 organizations in 68 countries, all 50 states in the United States, where they are trying to advance these organizations around those four areas. So we see that it inspires our people, it inspires our customers, it inspires governments that we deal with to be engaged in the community and not to be driven just by profits, but to be more part of the fabric of the community. And I know that all of us have a lot of stories to tell about the silver lining that's come out of this. But at the end of the day, as we've said, these are not relationships that start in the middle of the crisis. You know, and Stanley can vouch for this, but the PSCN network was literally on the phone every month for the last 5 years. And it's very difficult when you don't have a burning platform today to continue the dialogue on preparedness, right? And that's the biggest challenge and that's where a company's passion has to be driven to know that unfortunately disasters will occur, humanitarian crisis will occur, and you have to stay connected. So that's what this coalition is all about, continuing to foster that, not only between this group, but fostering all the way down to the community level.
Rowan, you manage risk and plan for things that in some ways can't be planned for, but you plan for all sorts of possibilities. Having said that, different countries have had different degrees of preparedness. We're not going to single any countries out right now. That's not what this discussion is about. But what are the themes or the commonalities that you have seen behind the industries that were prepared and on the best footing to deal with this and help people?
Well, Richelle, you're absolutely right. And as much as I work in the reinsurance industry, and which deals with extreme infrequent events, which is exactly what the humanitarian system deals with as well. And perhaps it's been surprising that the two sectors, which share so much in common, haven't come together earlier. But certainly it's been through platforms like Gaia, as well as others like the Insurance Forum, that over the last 4 or 5 years, that convergence has happened. And I want to pick up your question, but also the themes that Stan and Rob and Ed have mentioned. It's all about preparedness. It's all about having networks of trust. It's all about then being able to act fast when events happen. So the situation over the last 6 months has been patchy, country by country, sector by sector. But I would like to perhaps look ahead to the sort of, but certainly, as sort of, I think Ed's just hinted at, this event has overcome a lot of previous challenges where I had a challenge convincing institutions, both public and private, that they should understand and manage for infrequent but major catastrophes. I don't have to have that conversation anymore. It's not if they should, it's how they should. But to Ed's previous point, that requires consistent engagement month by month throughout the years that thankfully nothing happens, so that when it does happen. So I would say the reinsurance sector through Gaia and others has probably had 3 areas where it can really engage. And I'll give 3 examples. The first is through a shared understanding of risk. We've had an analytical revolution in the last 10 years that actually, particularly in the area of natural catastrophe risk, including pandemics, gives us a much greater understanding of what could happen around the world, even if it hasn't happened before, and to some degree, an ability to forecast. So that's been a big area of collaboration between various UN agencies and the industry. And that's led to the next innovation. And it's been a privilege to work with UN agencies like UN OCHA, as well as the International Federation of the Red Cross, and more recently UNICEF, to say, one of the challenges is in our current system, a disaster occurs, and it's not until it's become a disaster that we can mobilize resources to come to bear. But and yet, these days, with our ability to forecast and see when we've had reduced rainfall or other, for example, weather factors, we can tell that the situation has got to a point where there will be a disaster, the crops will fail, for example, or there will be water stress. Wouldn't it be better to be able to act on these triggers and move resources, financial and others, to afflicted areas before the disaster occurs? So that what's called forecast-based financing is very exciting and already happening. But together with our Gaia partners, we've got to build on that. And the third area is we have an enormous global capital market of which reinsurance is part. Can we not use that so that humanitarian financing, a little bit like an insurance premium, can be used for the, how can I put it, more regular cycle of events? When there's a real major catastrophe, can we not amplify the impact of public finances through accessing capital markets for things like resilience or catastrophe bonds to amplify the needs of institutions at critical moments? And it's been absolutely thrilling to work with these public institutions and the industry and see, as was hinted at by Rob and others, the growing trust and alignment of shared interest. So a long way to go, but I would say this dreadful year we've been through has been a breakthrough in innovation and trust, and we have to make the best out of this challenging episode and prepare for the next event, which of course won't be the same as this one.
And as you said, yes, this is absolutely a wake-up call that these things can happen, these things will happen again. And I think it's also been a wake-up call that when things like this happen, it doesn't affect everybody the same. I mean, it may seem that we're all in the same boat, but we're really, really not. I mean, women and children in particular, and low-income people are affected by this on a scale that most of us cannot even comprehend. So for that, I want to bring in to the conversation Mariarosa. Maria, what is it that you have seen about what this COVID emergency, the effect that it has had on women and children, and how have these public-private partnerships been able to hopefully step into the gap to help them?
Thank you very much, Richelle, and thank you very much, particularly to Dr. AlMaqki. His passion for public-private partnerships is, I think, an example for us to follow, and we're very happy as United Nations Population Fund to support it. So, Richelle, just coming to your question, I'm using the point of observation of my job. So what I do is basically building partnerships between the private sector, of course, and my organization. And UNFPA is the leading UN agency on sexual and reproductive rights. We talk about maternal health, we talk about gender-based violence, we talk about family planning. Of course, all these pieces of our agenda have been absolutely hit by this global pandemic. So maybe three things from this point of observation, and also coming from the private sector. I was head of sustainability of an important company in the past. So the first thing, which sounds obvious, but I think is worthwhile being recalled, is that business cannot be as usual. This pandemic has shown us a lesson that we don't have to forget. And this goes back to what Stanley alluded to. So we are at the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. We are talking about multilateralism. Well, we are looking at multilateralism as being more inclusive. We need to rethink multilateralism. We need to reshape multilateralism. We need to take into consideration what I call is the soft power of public-private partnerships. So this is something that we don't have to forget. And I'm saying that because, as Rowan was saying, probably during his speech, when we were, let's say, previously, before the COVID-19, I saw the timing for developing partnerships was longer and sometimes more cumbersome because we needed to understand each other. It's really a matter of aligning languages. So what happened during this pandemic is that we had to act quickly. This was a global pandemic. And we needed to kind of face this global humanitarian situation. So the languages aligned much more quickly. There was more flexibility. There was more will to act together. And this has brought to partnerships in a sort of unprecedented way. So we don't have to forget that. So the first lesson is, yes, let's remember the business cannot be as usual. And also the business of partnerships cannot be as usual. It can be quicker. It can be smoother. We can act better together. So this is the first lesson. And the second lesson is one of the things that we as United Nations care about, of course, is the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is our North Star. We don't have to forget that. So we are in a situation, if I look at our agenda, I mean, the data before COVID-19, 800 women dying every day for preventable causes while delivering. We released data during the pandemic, I think end of March, together with Johns Hopkins University, 47 million additional women at risk of gender-based violence at the time of the pandemic and after. Millions of children at risk of child marriage if we don't act quickly to keep on going with the programs we have. So that means keeping on supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. We don't have to forget that. This reshaped multilateralism needs to be the basis, needs to be the strength of the Sustainable Development Goals. And partnership, public-private partnerships are the key tool I see for that. And I think this has been underlined even more by the COVID-19. And the very last point, in all this, one thing we don't have to forget, because otherwise we're going to miss the goal also to prevent the same situation if a pandemic hits. We don't have to forget the principle of leaving no one behind. So that is something that doesn't have to remain only a theoretical principle. We need to put that in practice. And we have seen it that during the pandemic, these partnerships have allowed us to really, really reach the furthest left behind. So this is something that really we don't have to forget. If you ask me what's in it, what is the sense of doing this, I see that these are the 3 points.
Okay. Rob, let me ask you something. If somebody is a business leader and they're listening to this and they hear the part where you all say, you know, this is the future, this is what mission statements should be, employees want to be part of helping, et cetera, et cetera. What are the things that are still maybe in the back of their mind that still make them cautious about these public-private partnerships or skeptical? I don't know if that's too hard of a word, or how do you build that trust? What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I think sorry, you were asking me? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that, I think they need to look at what's going on. There is an incredible shift in the landscape, and Ed, Rowan, and Mariarosa just really kind of, if you mash those together, all of those points that they made. Yes, employees, want to work for companies that are socially conscious. If businesses want to recruit talent, they're going to need to wake up and see what's going on and start to build and establish these networks. And they need to see how these silos are breaking down. We all have a vested interest in having a stable economy and business environment. And the only way that we're going to be achieving this is breaking down these barriers. And if you look at what happened, particularly in the education sector, no industry was more affected than the education sector. They had to shut down overnight, and over 89% of the world's student population was affected by COVID and unable to achieve their educational outcomes. This has a tremendous impact on the SDGs, future recruitment for organizations. And I mean, one of the things that's happened, and we've been very vocal about this and talking about this, was because we are trying to encourage businesses and as well as ourselves to be more agile in this crisis. what happened is we realized we need, and we all have a vested interest in people being able to get back to work safely. So in the education sector, what we did was we shifted a number of resources in the company to move over to a new initiative and rapidly spin it up, which we call work.com. We partnered with the education community, and it was a way that allowed the students to get back on campus, if you will, so that they could do contact tracing, health surveys. These were all use cases we never thought about. Ability to intervene in real time, keep students healthy and safe. And University of Kentucky is an example. They had 50,000 students affected by this, and they were able to kind of implement and deploy this. So what we realized from a budget perspective is that there's going, and we call this initiative work.com. And many states have adopted this technology to help the public sector get up and running successfully in this kind of virtual time of crisis. I think the key thing here is what we realized is we needed to kind of have a more agile kind of budget cycle to be able to pivot in these directions, because as was said prior to me talking, is we need to be ready for this all the time. And these networks are the first step, but the second step is really making sure that you have those agile work streams to be able to address these very real crises. Food insecurity doesn't benefit businesses. Education shutting down doesn't benefit businesses. The economic impact of what's going on, businesses have a vested interest in making sure that we have a thriving and healthy global economy. So I think that that's the key thing. And I think that they all know this, and they realize that what we need to do is use forums like this to exemplify these models and tell stories about what's going on. I'm just talking about what's happening within Salesforce, but there is so much going on in the business community, and business needs to be more vocal about how they're operationalizing in these times, so that it gives other businesses who are trying to figure out how to adapt, because they all want to, it gives them ideas to implement their own models.
And Rowan, let me ask you this. Have you found that over time, you said that you've been able to try to sort of get businesses to understand now that these things can and will happen. Have you found it easier to have these discussions about public-private partnerships over the years? Do you think, whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, companies would have been like, but now it's a lot easier, do you find?
It is easier, Richelle. And I just want to pick up on your earlier question to Rob, because you were indicating to what extent can particularly private sector organizations feel confident about engaging. And I want to just put that in the context of the SDGs. In my sense, SDGs have been a bit of a slow burn in the wider business community. Obviously, they were launched 5 years ago, but suddenly in the last year or two, they've really picked up in the engagement by many companies, not just always the ones you might expect. And I think what's beginning to people realize is that the 16 sort of subject SDGs, of course, the 17th around partnerships, actually those SDGs are like a business plan for the world. It's remarkable that we have 16 goals, 180 or so targets. And actually all those 16 SDGs are basically saying, how are we going to manage a set of risks going forward that the world faces and underpin economic development and social well-being in a collective way around the world. It's a pretty remarkable framework for understanding public sector priorities, and indeed private sector ones too. And I think people are beginning to realize, as we face the events which the folks who have the vision to conceive the SDGs, many people thought that they were talking about another world. And of course, 5 years on, many of the challenges in the SDGs are becoming much more evident to all of us. So I think companies are suddenly realizing that they are very relevant generally, and they're going to have to understand this risk environment that's being framed. But also, companies can probably, with a little bit of imagination, understand which SDGs link to their core business. Because to your question to Rob, I think many companies, their first concern is, are these issues relevant to us? And I think increasingly that answer is yes. But then their concern is, if we get engaged in this, will we be somehow diverting, losing our focus, diverting our resources? And the key thing is to align your response to the SDGs to relate to your core business, just like Henry does. He relates his engagement with Gaia through his core business of delivering healthcare related materials and equipment around the world. We do it through trying to help make risk capital available. Salesforce does it through their remarkable technical platform. And that's the magic. Do something that relates to your core business and what your employees do, and see it as both, as Rob said earlier, this is the place where we cut our teeth on innovation. And then we apply that into our broader sort of mainstream corporate businesses. It's a remarkable laboratory.
Ed, as the founding member of Gaia, I'm going to put this final question to you to kind of wrap this up. What would you like to see as the future of these private-public partnerships?
Great question. I just want to also underscore the point that Rowan just made. I think that you can entice companies, bring them in more when you show them that if they play to their strengths, they're going to have a tremendous impact. I think that's a huge point. That's huge. What I would like to see is an expanded platform that continues to bring companies in at all levels, right? So you have here global organizations. But I think, as I said, there is a lot going on at the very local level. And having a platform that acts as an honest broker to bring in companies, businesses, SMBs at all levels, and puts them in categories of where they can play to their strengths. So you have telecommunications industries, you have technology industry, you have supply chain and logistics, you have healthcare industries, you have insurance. And if we can continue to develop a platform that draws in and manages them where you can get and leverage their strengths in an orderly fashion at all levels. And I think the insurance industry is a key risk assessment, risk identification, both in geography, that we can start preparing and deploying organizations, to those hotspots, because we know over time that there's going to be a food security issue in the Sahel region of Africa. We know that. And so if we can at least mobilize and prepare industries and companies at both the global, the national, and the local levels, towards those unknowns that we know have a high probability of occurring, plus or minus the more catastrophic unknowns like we're dealing with now, I think that we can even have a more powerful impact in organizing the private sector, in linking them to civil society, and really having an impact around the world. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there because of all the reasons that we've discussed. Employees, companies want to be a part of it. Institutions, civil society need us to be a part of it. Governments need us. And so working together in a more orderly fashion is what I would hope that we can continue to develop.
Absolutely. Ed Martinez with the UPS Foundation, thank you so much. Thank you to Rob Acker as well with Salesforce.org, Rowan Douglas with Willis Towers Watson, and Mariarosa with the UNFPA, and Mr. Stanley Bergman. Thank you all. And something that Stanley said that I think is going to get us to our call to action. Mr. Bergman said this cannot be just about discussion and passing around business cards. This is about action. That's why we have these conversations. So for our call to action, I'm going to hand the remainder of our time over to youth advocate Alliyah Logan. She hails from the Bronx. Her focus is on safety and communities, education, equity, and international gender equality, with a focus specifically on empowering Black youth. So now for our call to action, Miss Alliyah Logan.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It was so great to hear from you all and hear from the steps that you've been able to do to get involved and ensure that people are protected during these unprecedented times. My name is Alliyah Logan. I'm a Jamaican American youth advocate from the Bronx, and I'm so honored to be speaking to you all on behalf of UNICEF. In the midst of a global pandemic, racial injustice, and an economic crisis, we've seen global companies step up like never before by working with the United Nations and its affiliates. There have been so many companies delivering medical resources and personal protective equipment, some on this panel today, and companies have adapted to the current state and assisted governments with providing medical resources to areas in need. The United Nations and UNICEF are asking for more companies to lead with their expertise so that we are all able to close the gap of inequalities in this world, specifically targeting those most vulnerable to violence and poverty during and after this pandemic. The COVID-19 crisis is a children's rights crisis. We must act now to ensure that children are bearing the brunt of the long-term impacts of this crisis. As a high school student, I saw firsthand how the coronavirus pandemic can impact young people. When schools began to adjust to online learning, it became evident that the education system was not equipped to undergo a transition to online learning with the students' well-being in its best interest. Nearly 1.3 billion students are impacted by school closures, and many will not return to schools, especially young girls. This crisis has been destroying the infrastructure of essential services that keeps children safe. These times are uncertain, but what is certain is that we need your support to continue to reach children with life-saving resources. We have a lot of work to do to build back better and greener than ever before. We must invest in education, invest in the protection of children, clean water and sanitation, because this will reduce the damage that COVID-19 has caused and help us avoid future crises. We must create spaces for young people to be able to vocalize their experiences and work alongside us to build a better future. Now is the time for solidarity and partnership so that we can all reimagine a world safer for every child. Thank you all so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the partnerships that private companies are able to do and work with UNICEF with and the United Nations.